Hello, welcome to part two of Whitespace's Human-Centered Digital Transformation series. I'm Steve Ritchie. I'm a strategist for Whitespace, and we deal with clients who are in the midst of digital transformation. And today, we're going to move away from the what of digital transformation and talk about the who and a bit of the how. And before we get started, what we'd like to do is we need to make sure that you've scanned a QR code, and we're going to be getting your input a little bit during this webinar. We can't see you, and one of us is checking the comments. So for us to be able to adjust our message, it's very useful for us to get some feedback from you. So please scan the QR code that you see on the screen, and you'll go to an application called Menti, and tell us what's your expertise in stakeholder alignment, human-centered design, and product operating models. We'll give you a moment to fill that out.
So we're getting some answers coming through, which is great.
Hi, Giles. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Giles Morrison, Clinical UX Strategist here at Whitespace. Wonderful for you to be here for part two of our series on human-centered digital transformation.
All right. This is kind of what we were hoping for. Some people that have experience in stakeholder alignment, human-centered design, and some that are familiar with the product operating models. Okay, let's give it another minute. All right, if you're just joining, you haven't scanned the QR code, you can go to menti.com at the top of the screen there and put in that code, and that'll work for the rest of the session. So anytime we're asking for your feedback, you'll be able to give us your feedback and respond through that. Okay. All right, so this kind of matches what we had anticipated from looking at your profiles of the people that signed up. So a lot of experience in human-centered design, some in stakeholder alignment, quite a bit, and also with product operating models. And given kind of the newness or the trendiness of product operating models, that's kind of what we expected as well. All right, we're going to dive right in.
Yeah.
Let's see. To make it brief, we're going to talk about what does human-centered design and empowered product teams have to do with stakeholder alignment. We see human-centered design and empowered product teams of two of the most important superpowers when helping align stakeholders. Aligning stakeholders is never easy. I've worked in startups, big corporations, agencies, and it's the one consistent thing throughout my career that this is tough. It's never easy. And so we're going to focus in this hour on just the two parts that we think are the most useful, and then how we bring those things together for our clients. It's impossible with an audience this diverse to be fresh for everybody. We're going to be repeating some things you already know. Our goal is that people that have experience in human-centered design, you will feel empowered. You will realize that you have a very important role to play with aligning stakeholders, even if your product managers or IT managers or business stakeholders don't recognize that. So this is to remind you of your own superpowers. And those of you who do not have a lot of experience in human-centered design, it's to appreciate the methods and these approaches, look for them when you're in stakeholder environments, and especially when things aren't going well. Remember some of these human-centered design principles that we're talking about. As we get started, one principle of alignment with stakeholders is to make sure we're talking about the same thing, like talking about the same terms. So what do we mean by human-centered design? Human-centered design started a long time ago, even back in the 60s and 70s with designing technology. You'll see on the left, the International Standards Organization came up with a criteria for what is human-centered design. Much of it is about understanding users, putting users at the center, and focused on technology and ergonomy and human factors. These were the words used decades ago. But something happened along the way, And business discovered and organizations discovered that the same approaches to designing stuff, designing technology, can be used to solve problems in business, can also be extended to services. So the latest definition from Harvard, what they're teaching all their MBA students and their IT and everybody at Harvard Business School, is that it's a problem-solving technique for both products and services. So it's not just about designing tech or designing physical products. We're going to go through some of what we see are these parts of these superpowers. The biggest one of all is empathy. So people trained in human-centered design, people that excel in human-centered design, have measurable empathy with customers. They can recognize that the customers and the users are not them. So they have this a personality and a disposition towards empathy that extends usually beyond a professional world, and they can empathize with people and stakeholders they're working with in a profound way. More than just feeling empathy for customers, people trained in human-centered design have an obsession about behavior. And we're not talking about designers who function, who focus really just on the form, on something beautiful, on how something looks and feels. We're talking about design in the larger sense of function as well. And this obsession with behavior carries through. I mean, basically all business outcomes from the digital transformation efforts that we're helping with come down to human beings behaving differently with products, or human beings behaving differently in how they deliver those products and services. So human-centered designers, they have this empathy, they have this focus on behavior, but not everybody has the access to be able to observe and spend time with users. And this is where methods for visualizing users' contexts come into play. So observing what people are doing, what customers are doing, and then representing that so other human beings in the organization can participate and collaborate in the problem solving. Something that we have found with human-centered designers is that they work very well with ambiguity, that they're very good in situations when there is no one correct answer. I remember working with a project manager who couldn't fathom how 6 different designers facing the same problem could come up with 6 different solutions. I just reminded him the same with developers. 6 developers and programmers faced with the same problem will come up with 6 different sets of code. So this is something that designers and developers do very well. And this helps a lot when working with stakeholders, because it helps recognize where things might not be clear, and it opens people's minds to multiple solutions. Part of this problem solving is an ability to move from the very abstract to the very concrete. I think we've all worked with people who function very well at a strategic level, maybe a PowerPoint level, we might call it, or work very, very well in the details. Something about human-centered designers is they hourly, minute by minute, day by day, alternate very quickly between high-level goals and abstractions and pixels and form and materials and textures. So this ability to alternate very quickly between the abstract and concrete also helps designers meet different stakeholders where they are. So some business stakeholders might just stay at the abstract level and people aren't understanding them. Designers can help come in and make things concrete. Some stakeholders might be down in the Excel and down in the data calculations. Human-centered designers are very well good at, let's blow that up and let's look at the bigger picture and ask ourselves why, and move up to the abstract. Part of making the abstract clear is what we call boundary objects. Boundary objects are artifacts. They're design artifacts. They are tools that are used across all disciplines to help people with very different backgrounds and even different communities come and collaborate together. Here's an example from the Swiss Center for Design and Health. This is an operating room, and these are cardboard cutouts, and these are all different kinds of technicians and practitioners and medical professionals trying to imagine a new way of working. And rather than talking about it and using words, and they've built a mock-up so they can start imagining. And this mock-up looks different to each one of them. They're looking for different things, but a boundary object helps us communicate across our boundaries and move forward together. Prototypes, architectural models, blueprints, concept cars. These are all artifacts that help diverse groups communicate and collaborate across boundaries.
And it really, really works. Speaking from experience.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I used to have. I used to have a rule of thumb for myself. After 10 minutes of people arguing, my own personal rule was shut up and draw. Get to the board and just draw it out and just get these ideas physical. Something else. Most of us trained in the West are very, very good at convergent thinking. So having a lot of ideas, moving very quickly, rationally towards a solution. And once we've got that solution, refining it, and delivering it. What designers tend to be very good at is not only divergent thinking, but divergent thinking. So starting a process of saying, yeah, we think this might be a good idea. This might be a good solution. Let's open it back up. Let's diverge our thinking before we narrow it down. And it's a bit like this abstract and concrete, but it's opening things up and closing it down again. And this is a core part of design thinking. Some of you have surely heard of design thinking. Some of you I know have been on design thinking workshops. This opening and closing, diverging, opening the idea, brainstorming, and then choosing and selecting and coming back down again and refining this is something that designers and human-centered designers are very good at. Again, this helps working with stakeholders because sometimes we're getting blocked on a solution and we need to work with stakeholders and open things back up again. So if we look at human-centered design as superpower number one, superpower number two is organizational. It's how people that are building products and services work within organizations and work with customers. It starts to look very different than traditional IT models or project models. We're going to tell you a little bit about how you can recognize that teams are starting to get empowered. Instead of 8 different stakeholders coming with their own perfectly formed view of what the solution is, we work together to identify and say, listen, everybody's got some incomplete information here. Let's work on filling our gaps so nobody in the room has a completely fully informed solution. Rather than arguing about this, let's start identifying where we have gaps in information or where we're understanding things differently. I've worked on plenty of teams. My whole early part of my career was built about basically pitching a solution to somebody paying for that solution, a stakeholder. And now it's not so much about pitching a solution when the team's empowered. It's more like we're humble. We say, listen, we have a hypothesis. We're going to give you some data about why we think this is a hypothesis, about a product that we need to build or a feature we need to build, or how this is really going to help customers solve a problem. And rather than pitching to a stakeholder, it's agreeing on which hypotheses we're going to invest in. It's getting away from democracy. So it's not everybody gets an equal opinion and we're going to grow in the room and we're all going to water down our solution. It's about respecting that people bring individual expertise and respecting. If the tech lead said this is the best tech way to do it, we're not going to argue endlessly about that. We're going to respect that. Again, not about consensus. It's more about committing. We don't have to agree to commit to move forward. This is a principle we've heard from Jeff Bezos before. He talks about this: disagree and commit. The idea is that we frequently will put, especially executive stakeholders, in a role to have to agree with us to move forward. They hired us for our expertise. This is more towards the inform and move on than, oh, please, 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 we're going to spend endless cycles trying to convince you. The thing I like here about Bezos's quote is a team was pitching to him, Amazon Studios. He disagreed with what they were doing, but then he realized, hey, listen, I'm not going to block this. And that last sentence, consider how much slower the decision cycle would be if the team had tried to convince me rather than simply get my commitment. So this, when teams are empowered, there's much more of this. Okay, we disagree with what the team is saying, but we agree enough that we're going to commit to moving forward. And again, this goes very much with these hypotheses. We're not agreeing that their solution is the best, but we agree that their hypothesis is better than others, and we're willing to invest time and money in them going forward. back when I started my career, stakeholder management was a lot about how frequently should we talk with the stakeholders, what's the form of communication with them, what's the grid, what's the set up the calendar, and people would spend their entire I remember project managers spending their entire day setting up all the meetings and getting that just right. What we find is that empowered teams, it's not so much about the frequency and format. It's not rigid like that. It becomes more about the roles, the responsibilities, and those interactions and the quality of those. At this point, we are going to ask for your input. Who in your organization today is most accountable for the outcomes of a digital product? So scan the QR code, and it's free text. You can just enter in your text of who is most responsible or accountable for the outcomes of a digital product.
This is a really good question to be asking right now. And I'm expecting there to be a variety of answers, but let's see what happens. IT,
Mm-hmm.
product managers, the business, CEO. It's interesting, the CEO one though, because from my own experience at least, with really big companies, it may not always be the CEO. It's still probably going to be someone lower down, but for the startups, CEO
Yeah.
for sure.
I've always been afraid when I worked in big companies and the CEO gets down in the weeds. I think, don't you have something else more important to be
This
doing?
is it. This is it. You would hope that they
Yeah.
may be a bit too busy
Yeah.
to be heavily involved.
I remember talking with a colleague who was doing a lot of work with the U.S. Navy, and he was presenting to the all the top admirals of the United States Navy in Washington D.C. A presentation that had taken him months, and when finally he presented it, the most senior admiral in the room said, "Yeah, but shouldn't that ship on slide 16 be facing left?" And I just thought, wow, okay, this wasn't framed well. These stakeholders were not aligned and managed in a good way. Okay, so what do we see here? We've got business owner. Yeah. Okay. Product owners. My boss. I like that.
Yeah. VP of development is an interesting one. One I've not really, well, I haven't heard of VP of development before.
I've worked in more traditional IT organizations, and that was a thing. Typically in the old world, when IT decided, IT would decide what would get launched because they had the power to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay. All right.
The head of product, it's good that we see that. It complements with what we're going to be saying in a little while.
All right. Well, we've got 14 responses. Let's talk about so we've talked about these empowered teams. I've talked about some how you can what do things look like when teams are empowered? You know, moving more towards filling in gaps than selling ideas, not so much consensus, but trusting the team to make the right decisions. Let's talk about how that happens. So the empowerment of teams, in a way, is based at some roots in human-centered design. One is a very, very basic principle that the people that are working on a product have very close contact with the people that are using the product. That sounds very simple, very basic. It is shocking how still in 2024 that is still, in many cases for our clients, the exception. People in the business have a lot of contact with the customers, but the team actually building the products and services don't have direct access to customers. So empowerment begins with this. It begins with the product teams, which are made of somebody on the product management side, head of product management, product design, and tech, all having direct contact with customers. one reason of this is it's efficient. It's the cost of trying to capture everything that, for example, maybe the user researcher or the product designer is observing about customers and trying to represent to the team. We have to do that. All stakeholders can't participate in every single user interview, but nothing replaces that team itself observing customers in their context, in the big world, outside the organization. By customers, we mean people inside the organization too. These could be colleagues, but we call even internal colleagues customers because Mike that I have lunch with in the cafeteria at my company is a friend or a colleague. He becomes a customer when he's using an application that I'm trying to develop for him and his role. So this all looks good. Okay, product teams directly access with customers. Here's where the problem starts. Executive stakeholders, the CEO, head of finance, head of marketing, head of sales, head of revenue, head of growth. These people have a lot of direct contact with customers. Organizational stakeholders inside, they have a lot of contact with customers, a subset of customers. So usually organizational stakeholders have a deep contact with customers, executive stakeholders broad, and the product teams, maybe some. The bigger problem is becoming when all three of these groups of people on the left, executive stakeholders, product teams, organizational stakeholders, all feel accountability for the product and service and the outcomes that we're hoping for. This is where there's endless circles between what the stakeholders think is right for the product and service and what the product team. And what the product operating model that most of our clients are trying to move to now simplifies this a bit. It keeps that strong link between product teams and customers. It doesn't say executive stakeholders and organizational stakeholders don't talk to customers. Of course they do. I mean, if you're in sales, your job is to be working with customers all day long. But the big change here is that the empowered product teams have the accountability for the outcomes of the product and service. So stakeholders become information sources. Executive stakeholders become strategic visionaries that set the direction for what we need to do in the business. And product leadership helps the product teams prioritize across products. And this localization, this simplification of the responsibility for the outcomes is one of the biggest things we've seen a change in the way that IT and digital is rolled out in big firms and in small firms as well. It's not just a power grab by the product teams. It's a massive amount of responsibility for the product teams. And that's why good product managers are so far really hard to find. What happens is because they are accountable now for not only the customer outcome, how usable, how desirable the product is, but also the organization's outcomes. Are we going to make money or achieve our organizational goals with this? Can we ship it? Can we support it? Can we market it? Those product managers on the product teams suddenly have a responsibility to get as much valuable information from the organizational stakeholders and the executive stakeholders as they can. So it becomes a much more collaborative environment where everybody on the left is working together, but the product teams ultimately decide, this is the product we're launching in November. This is the product we're launching in continuously in sprints to try to achieve these business goals and these outcomes. At Whitespace, we pull these things together. So we pull together human-centered design. That's our roots as an agency. And we pull together some of these principles helping organizations move towards empowered product teams. How do we do this? We do a lot of things. The four main things we do is we help our clients understand their stakeholders' professional contexts, help them understand stakeholders as individuals. We reinforce some foundations that we think, three things that we think are absolutely the foundations for all kind of stakeholder alignment. And then we fill the gaps. So rather than, again, pitching ideas, we help our clients recognize where are their gaps in the organization, and we operationalize that. All right, we're going to give you another quiz because we'd really like your input on this. And we wanted to prime you for the next bit of the discussion. Think about stakeholders that you've worked with. Quite a few of you said you've got a lot of expertise working with stakeholders. think about those stakeholders and think about yourself. Which type of stakeholder is the least like you? And in what way? All right, we're going to give you some time to. Giles, I'm thinking when you were in practice as a doctor, you had a lot of stakeholders beyond your patient.
Yep.
Who are the least? And you doctors are special, so your brains work in really special ways. Whose stakeholder's brain was least like yours when you were trying to recommend a treatment or course of action?
It's a really good question. Normally, someone in management who's a non-clinician. I still remember there being instances where we're being asked to move patients, and literally the patient is on their deathbed. And it's just so that we can make more room in the hospital. But the truth is, unless someone is dying, really, we should be making some allowances for someone to who is actually dying, pass, at peace with their family,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there is always some other space you can put new patients. You can, to be honest with you. So that used to cause some problems. And I suppose also, even though we're all doctors, definitely other clinicians, but from different specialities who have a different agenda. So as we'll come to soon, it is that different agenda motivations which can really cause the conflicts. But when you know about each other's agendas and that misalignment of motivations, but there's still a common goal that you want to strive towards, there is ways to actually make things work.
Yeah, I got it. I'm also thinking, doctors I know tend to be quite logical, factual, data-based, and so much of
Yeah.
medicine is emotional, fear-based.
Mhm. That's right. Even for the clinicians as well, though, I wouldn't say it's significantly different working in UX, that there's still going to be a need to balance what you know to be what's going on based on facts, but also what you know to be what's going on based on your emotional response to
Yeah.
what you see, to what you hear. We shouldn't ignore, for sure, our emotions when it comes to working in digital. Is still very significant, be it as us as designers, but of course for our end users that we're serving as well.
Mm. We're getting a few interesting responses here. Finance, they focus on costs, not thinking about growth. Interesting. Yeah, I've experienced that.
Mhm.
And cost cutting and legal for sure. Yeah, I think legal would be mine too if I were filling this out. Legal, the hardest thing for me is if somebody asks me to review something or principles for moving forward, we can talk about principles.
Mhm.
I've worked with so many lawyers that can't discuss principles without seeing a draft of something. They're saying, like, I can't comment on something until you give me words or a screen. Somebody had mentioned, only approve PDFs, not HTML. I think even a bigger issue that they can't approve, they can't give input on something until it's final. That's something that I've seen with some legal people that I've worked with. Oh, procurement. Yeah. Yeah, this is really good. Business folks, they only think of the bottom line for the company, not necessarily the customers. Yeah.
It's interesting, that one about business folks, because I can't help but consider that a UX professional that's really trying to make a difference for their end users are also business folk.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally
There's the
agree with you.
distinction that's being made here by this comment, but really, I try not to disassociate business needs in my practice as a UX professional, because ultimately I can't serve my end users unless the business is happy as well.
Yeah.
The business has to be successful. You got to be thinking about the bottom line, because that's what's providing the money to do what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of this, I think, and I'm looking at the procurement one and business folks, especially sales.
Yeah.
Like maybe the conflict between sales and maybe brand is
Hmm.
it's a matter of time horizon. I think a lot of our work with stakeholders realize that we're talking about different time horizons.
Hmm.
Salespeople are typically rewarded by quarterly bonuses or annual bonuses, and brand people build up value over years. I can
Hmm.
remember a very senior business person I worked with. I was on a brand team. Said my job is to make money for our stakeholders this quarter. Your job as the brand person is to make sure that I do that in a way that doesn't hurt us and hurts my ability to make money 3 years from now, 4 years from now,
Hmm.
5 years from now, because some stuff I'm doing might be pretty stupid and might degrade the brand. And I love that difference of his perspective of, yeah. And he saw a very healthy tension between us as mutual stakeholders, me
Hmm.
in terms of brand, him in terms of business and sales. Time horizons. I think procurement's the same. I've tried to fight with procurement to get things done faster. Just sign this contract. We need to get going fast.
Hmm.
They're looking at, okay, is this a precedent? Is this risk we're taking in the longer term? Pause. So I think a lot of that healthy tension is based on different time horizons.
Yeah.
Okay, I think the responses have slowed down. Let's move to the next.
Hmm.
Um, Next slides here. So when we help our clients look at stakeholders and work with stakeholders, we help them step back and first think a stakeholder in the yellow box here is part of an organization. Someone's part of a legal team. We need to know what the legal team's function is in the organization. This sounds really basic, but it's taken me, for example, I had a job once where it took me 6 months to figure out the difference between legal, compliance, risk, and privacy. Um, and it took a lot of conversations to figure that out. So before we even talk about individuals, we need to understand the organizational function of the stakeholders that are in the room with us. Then we need to realize that in that function, we're talking about individual jobs, individual roles. So these little images here, we were thinking of like the lanyards, the name tags. Like, okay, this is a person in a role, in a hierarchy. So we understand what legal does, but what does Marie in legal do? What is her specific niche? What is she incentivized to do? And I think this word of incentives is very, very important when understanding stakeholders. There's a lot of healthy mismatch of incentives. I had a data privacy officer tell me one time. I was asking her to review some work we were doing before we really started. Privacy by design at the very beginning, and she said, if it were up to me, you guys wouldn't launch any digital products. But I know that's not reasonable, and I know that we need to launch these digital products for our clients. But my incentive as the data privacy officer is to reduce leaks and to reduce the misuse of data. So I appreciated how frank she was about her incentives being different than mine. And it kind of, it was provocative. Another thing that we help our clients do is to look past the hierarchy, especially in big organizations, especially with stakeholders who have been there a long time and have maybe moved around within the organization and have built up a community within the organization, a loose network of influence. Um, and this is where it starts getting soft and what people would call political. It's paying attention who has lunch together, who laughs together. This is a lot of what was lost when we moved to Zoom, and we couldn't see who was looking at each other in the meeting room, which we've lost in these formats. So this is something we help with. Something else we also look at is the stakeholder in front of us in a company, in a function, in a role, also has a professional function outside the company. This person is part of a community of practice. Um, Part of a profession that has standards, that has certificates, that has career paths. This person might have ambitions beyond this role and this company. Um, so we also are aware of that, and we help our clients be aware of, maybe is this person trying to move up, and is this a stepping stone role? That might explain some of the motivations. And this is not just all touchy feely. There are tools for documenting this and capturing this and helping operationalize it across multiple stakeholders. So different product teams can, when they encounter the same stakeholder, oh yeah, okay, let's see what other product teams have discovered about this stakeholder. And it also is a respectful way of not bothering that same person in legal, marketing, compliance, risk, finance for the same information time and time and time again. That's a good way to lose the trust and to disempower a product team. So there's tools like that we've used and we've recommended to our clients to use. But it goes beyond that. And there's something that we want to talk about beyond the professional context is stakeholders as individuals. So before that person in finance or that person in risk or reporting sat on your project or is giving you input for the product you're trying to launch, they're individuals. They have a personality. They process information in different ways. They have different views of risk. They have different emotional responses to novelty and new things. There's extroversion and introversion. There's all kinds of things that are a part of their professional role. We came across this. We love this example of within the job function of product management, people bring their own quirks and individual preferences into that. And this company product board tried to come up with kind of a taxonomy of how does personality merge with that same role of product manager. So we have the rhino in the top right, somebody who's consistently looking for the new thing. Oh, this is super high value. It's really high value. Or the yak right below, yet another KPI. People that give me that data, give me that measurable thing, or it's hard for me to engage in the discussion. Or the zebra, zero evidence, but really arrogant. So somebody, their personalities, they've got some swagger, they've got some confidence, they've got some social power to try to convince and not buy data. So what we like is this view of merging someone's role that the organization and their job has given them with their personality that's been with them since they were a kid. This all influences how decisions are made. This all sounds good. And, okay, we can map it, we can be aware of it. But I suspect quite a few of you are thinking what we do. Okay, that's great. But there's always that one person. So when we get a bunch of people together in a room, there's always that one person that is just difficult. When I was younger, we used to complain about it. We used to try to bond as the team by complaining against that stakeholder that was annoying. I got more experience, and now that I'm consulting and helping other clients deal with this, we anticipate there will be bad apples. So we check, we look for signs, we watch body language. We look at how people even text differently. We look at who's looking at whom. We look at how people are reacting to each other before and after the meeting. And we confirm, is this person really needed? Is this person needed to be informed? Do they really have decision-making power? Before we invest a lot of energy in them, do we absolutely need this bad apple as a stakeholder for the transformation work we're trying to get done? If yes, then it's about relationships. And that's the number one thing that any person trained in change management will tell you. It's about relationships, and it's about investing wisely. And so, yeah, we'll have a chat. We start, and we go in not trying to convince. We go in with, as we talked before, about the notion of information gaps. That person might have information that we don't have, might have an understanding of the same information we have in a different way. So maybe they're not a bad apple. Maybe they're just grumpy because they have such a different view and nobody's listening to them. So we start listening with a lot of empathy. When there's groups, we try to create ground rules. So we don't, like, for example, in a workshop or in a meeting, if this person is constantly bringing negative comments and nothing constructive, then we try to set some ground rules at the beginning when everything is happy, before we start a new initiative or a new sprint. And that person doesn't feel singled out. But we say, listen, this kind of, if the apple is really a bad apple and is really pulling everybody down, at least we can point back to those rules and they don't feel arbitrary. One of the beautiful things we've seen is that people that started out very negative or very difficult as stakeholders have the potential, the highest potential, to become allies of the transformation we're trying to do, especially in the case where they saw something differently than we did and we took the time to listen to them. And then we incorporated what we learned from them into what we were proposing. They can become some of our biggest allies. Sometimes that doesn't work. We're realistic. Have an escalation plan. And the one thing, the older I'm getting, that I'm learning is that one bad apple really can ruin the whole batch. That we can spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to move forward with bad apples, and rather than just escalate quickly, very quickly, remove the bad apple or change the scope of what we're trying to get done. So we have the understanding with our clients. We help them understand the professional context of the stakeholders, the individual attributes of the stakeholders. And then there's three foundations that we see that need to be rock solid before we do all of our discussions and our prototyping and our understanding of users and all that. One at the bottom at the base is the clear business strategy. And what we need from the executive stakeholders and why we split executive stakeholders from the rest is we need a business strategy, not a product strategy, not a, but we need to know what the business is going to be interested in the next year or two. I mean, this can be any kind of organization. We use the word business. Down to the level of segmentation, which group of human beings are we going to be trying to solve problems for? If that's solid, then we look at how clear is the product vision. Does all the different product teams know how this is all fitting together for a group of customers? If that's clear, then we work on, does everybody have the same idea of the kinds of outcomes that we're trying to move forward? Digital transformation is not about features and tools. It's about human beings behaving differently. So do we have a different idea about what kind of customer behaviors are going to be useful for the business? We could talk about those at length, but the one I wanted to focus on that human-centered design professionals tend to be very good at, and the one that we get called upon the most, is to help organizations clarify their product vision. So they start with big feature lists, a lot of different teams. They've analyzed the overlap, but how do they come up with one compelling vision that pulls it all together? The one thing is to define a very inspirational future from the customer's point of view, solving a problem for the customer. I'm going to play this video. You don't need to hear it, but this is technology for farmers. This is for agriculture. The one thing I want you to notice here is how everything is showing the customers of this product in context. And the voiceover is explaining, okay, the guy can get the up-to-date analysis of the soil quality, can get the weather, can talk with headquarters about what's going on with the pesticides and things like that. But the thing that makes this different, and this is the thing we work with a lot of our clients, is making sure not only it's inspirational, very futuristic silos and all this, but that it's from a customer's perspective. It doesn't have to be a fancy video, although it's super useful to pull together a lot of different things into a narrative. It can be a jobs to be done summary, like you see below, or the agile product visions. Simple statements, but what makes them distinct is that they're always from a customer's perspective. So that's one of the things one of the foundations we work the most on. So the foundations are set. We understand the stakeholders. They're working well together. We understand them as individuals. We've ruled out the bad apples. We've still got a lot of work to do. And for that, I want to introduce our Chief Experience Officer, Julia Borkenhagen. Julia, let's see.
Hi, Julia. Hi, Steve. How's it going?
Very good. Very good. I've worked with you before on many stakeholder alignment things. So
Indeed.
We want to set this up for you that let's imagine everything is good. Strategy is clear. Product vision is clear. You do a lot of work in helping our clients fill the gaps between them and how they understand the problems and the solutions. So I'd like you to just start telling us about how you do that.
Right. So assuming that we've already aligned them around what you were just saying, the strategy, the vision, and so on, which is a huge deal, not an easy one to do. The next thing is really to agree what actually is going to happen here with this particular product or service, or products and services. It can be more than that. So I think one of the best illustrations for that I've ever come across is done by a guy called Jeff Patton. He wrote a book on user story mapping. I highly recommend for anybody who's into user stories. It's a very visual approach to user stories, which is great. And as you can tell, obviously, it's all about being visual. That's why I said the 10-minute rule of, shut up and draw. I love that, what you said, Steve. I never heard about it before, but I will use it now every time. It's like, that's Steve's rule. What you can see here is like Jeff's thing. So everybody actually thinks that they are in agreement. They have talked. They've maybe, written lots of specs or requirements. It's like, yeah, okay. We all agree what we want to do. And then when they actually visualize their thoughts, they realize that no, they don't quite align. And then there needs to be a lot of discussions and iterations. It's a very iterative process, as any designer will tell you, to come up with a solution that everybody then feels comfortable and can buy in. So shared documents aren't shared understanding. I think that's the key message here. And we've all had, these massive specs to read through. And in the end, the product that would come out of it wasn't at all what the different stakeholders had imagined.
Mm-hmm. Well, moving beyond words, what are some of the tools and the artifacts, these boundary objects that you use to help diverse stakeholders understand and fill in the gaps of how they understand potential solutions?
Yeah, I mean, there are many, of course, depending on where you are in the whole journey of the product, whether you're at the very beginning and you're just, first of all, having to establish what is the status quo, what's the as-is status, what does the user journey look like for the different personas, what are the personas, what are the users saying? So, what you can see here, for instance, there's some data, some stats that were gained in some usability testing, maybe. We have there's a very low-fi visual of wireframes that then help to come some initial kind of concept thinking around that, aligning. Obviously, we use a lot of user research always and tools that capture that research, so we can, if possible, compile maybe some little clips to play back to stakeholders, and they can hear firsthand what their users are talking about. That's extremely powerful. Because it's one thing for us as researchers or designers to do things, it's another to communicate it to stakeholders. Those are two different sides, and there can be the best design in the world. If that person can't deliver actually the message properly, then it's a shame, because it can end up in some kind of cupboard somewhere and nobody ever sees it again. So all those artifacts are really important, but they have to be presented well, communicated well, shared in an effective way. So
Julie, you mentioned the sharing part. I mean, a lot of the work that empowered teams do are one-to-one with shareholders, like talking to the person in finance, or going and figuring out how that data is calculated, or where it's sourced, or when it expires, or things like that. But there is sometimes a need to work with these artifacts and work with others in larger groups.
Right.
And I know that you are a master facilitator. You've done so many workshops. I've seen you facilitating workshops. When are workshops most useful? And what are your tips for using workshops to align?
Right. I think a workshop, they sometimes get a bad reputation, right? Because there's a lot of workshops that are just being done because you do a workshop, and that's never a good reason. So you have to have a really, really good reason why you want to bring people together. So it could be either because you just want to inform the right people and they really need to hear what's going on or what has been discussed, or they need to make a decision. So you need to bring them together in a room. So this is really about the filling in the gaps that we're talking about here. It could also be, though, that you're kind of stuck and you need some collective brain power. And you can't get that so well in asynchronous working, which sometimes works well, but sometimes you just have to get together and get that energy up and running, and then ideas spark and people can build on each other's ideas. And that's where the magic happens, really. Sometimes also people just need to be having some personal face-to-face interaction, because the team has been very dispersed and they need to kind of just get together and really share a good moment. And then they can share a good moment around discussing a certain topic, but it doesn't have to be, something earth-shaking. It can just really be almost like a feel-good therapy session. But it can be a workshop, because we don't want to call it therapy, but honestly, it sometimes is therapy in my mind.
With that note, I think in terms of the therapy, I've seen workshop time, not an entire workshop, but exposure time in a workshop can be a very, very successful way of moving a bad apple into an ally. I have found sometimes very studious, very data focused, very introverted stakeholders that are just not heard, especially when we were all meeting in the physical world and they didn't command the room. And giving that person some time to voice their concerns, kind of using our power to convene and to control the stage in a workshop, can be used to raise the volume or lower the volume on some stakeholders too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the bad apple is an example where you really have to be careful, because if you know in advance who are the kind of problem children, you can prepare them in advance, right? You know they have to be there, but then really work on them so that they're not going to torpedo the whole session, because they might. And same as you're saying, the people who are very shy but you think have a lot of value because you already have done your previous research on these different stakeholders. We have to get them out of their little niche and really get them to contribute. You know that as well, and you can get them involved. So I think especially online workshops can be really great for introverts, because it's very equalizing, and everybody can be on a Miro board and add stickies, and it's much less intimidating than being in a physical room, which is great too, by the way. But it's a different way of getting the shy people to really open up.
Yeah, I think I've also seen a very, very positive effect of the pandemic and us getting used to working online is now these taking moments to work quietly and then rejoining the group. I'm seeing that filter into in-person workshops a lot more. And,
Yes.
Back to the Condon's idea of thinking fast and slow, that not everybody thinks very quickly and can articulate. And some of the best ideas are lost because that quiet person thinking about something, maybe not confident enough to articulate it. So this is, again, back to understanding the personalities and the comfort zones of the people in the room with us.
Yes,
I'm looking at time. I just want to move this.
Big topic, and I could speak ages about it, but I think that you're right. The sort of whole flow of being together, but then being separated and having the right mix also. So you have to really prepare really, really thoroughly. Any kind of workshop needs to be, there has to be a dry run. There has to be preparing the different stakeholders already who are going to attend, etc., so that then the workshop can be a success.
Yeah. Not only do you do one-off workshops, you help clients operationalize this and try to figure out how to, when they've had success with a group of stakeholders, with a product team, for example, increasing the chances that they're going to have that success again and again and again across different product teams. We are increasingly being asked by our clients to help the success of that one team be replicated across others. Tell us a little bit in the closing minutes here, how you're doing that. I know you're actively doing that right now with some clients.
Yeah, so this particular project is interesting because we worked on that last year and established basically a first round of how to do, and not just workshop, it was really a series of how to come to, how to define a data strategy across disease areas. So that was the big ask. And so they said, well, this was really great. We did that with 2 diseases. Now we want to expand, having more disease areas do the same one, but we need your help. You've done you gave us this nice playbook, but help us along so that we can really learn how to apply that in this next round. And so we were really pleased about that. First of all, that it took some root, and they modified it a bit as well to adapt to their own needs. But most of it, the I think most gratifying thing is that you as a consultant, you come in and out, and you give them your great thoughts and so on. But then to see that it's actually working, I think that's amazing. So the magic, if you want, is that we really planned carefully to have a sequence of different working sessions that will then culminate into a big workshop at the end. So this is not just a one-off thing. It's really a work in progress, and there's some offline work. There's some Excel spreadsheets. There's so you have to kind of refine, vote down to like the key big ideas that we want to discuss at this big session, so that it really makes sense and so on. So there's a lot of legwork involved from different stakeholders again, but kind of identifying who needs to be there, what role do they have to play. I think that's the most critical one. It's about playing a role. And it's not necessarily the role that you will have in your real life as a data scientist or as a statistician. That's also something that we have to realize is for people who actually work on a daily basis in a regular job, this is a kind of almost like theater. They have to play a different role to be successful.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. I think the biggest sign of success that you've told me about this is when some of your clients, they move from doing workshops to just doing their homework, just preparing and then synchronizing themselves. And there's less time spent in the big room. They don't need the energy of the big theater space of a workshop. They kind of move towards doing their work. And then they only meet when they need to. And I think that's a good sign of evolution when that happens. Guys, that's it for our time today, but we're going to ask you. This is part 2 of the series, and we've got 3 other topics that we're going to cover in the next sessions, and we'd like to get an idea from you what you're most interested in. So the next 3 topics we're going to be covering are discovery research, service design, and design thinking. So what I'd like to ask you to do is on the app, on Minty, rate your interest to participate and join another webinar with your expertise in these topics. I'll give you a few minutes, or the last minute for this.
Of course, we'll be covering all these topics at some point, but it's just deciding which one is next. But we've got the date set for that, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, votes are coming in now. So it's interesting. So there's particular interest in service design, which is a little bit less expertise than discovery research and design thinking.
Charles, I'm going to ask you a question. In the workshops that you've run, sometimes I think Julian mentioned sometimes people do a workshop just to do a workshop. I've seen it kind of a symptom of when there's low energy or low commitment. Executives say, "Oh, let's get everybody in a room. Let's let the good feelings of a workshop." Have you seen that happening? Is that do you see that as a symptom as well?
I haven't seen that professionally myself. A more common reason I've seen is, well, this is just how it's done, isn't it? So as far as they're concerned, this is just the way of doing it. But when you're working as UX, it's not like baking where there's such a precise science to it and there is no creativity. Not to say there is never any creativity to baking, but like you can't mess about with the ratio of sugar and eggs and flour and like you have some serious mistakes. With what we're doing, we need to actually recognize that sometimes there are certain tools and techniques that are more useful than others. And so workshops are not going to be the silver bullet. They're not going to save and solve all problems that you've got. So that's more of the sort of issues that I've witnessed professionally, is that workshops are just put on a pedestal and given far too much priority than they really should at times.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that I went through that phase where I was recommending a workshop for everything just because it gave me energy. A lot of our work was lonely, sitting on our desks. Like, oh, let's get everybody together and solve problems together. And oh man, now I think I've flipped to the other side. I'm just kind of like, do we really need a workshop? Yeah, it's a lot of energy and a lot of investment.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think all right. So looks like interest and expertise. It looks like service design will be a good candidate, a very good candidate. So highest interest and less expertise for us. That's the sweet spot of what we want to, what we focus on, and then discovery research, and then design thinking. Okay, we'll take that in consideration for our next session. And finally, we're going to ask you for some your feedback. What did you like most about this session? And then right as we close, we'll put that up, and you can then give us comments on what we could have done better. So we're going to leave this up on your phone or wherever you're doing the survey. And Jaws, do you have the date for our next session? We can put that up on the board, and then we'll wish everybody.
I believe it is October 15th.
There we go.
So feel free to get that in your calendars ahead of time, ready. October 15th is going to be our next webinar.
Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you then on that next session. And take your time. We're gonna leave that Minty quiz open, so take your time, and you can fill it out, and we'll get the responses.
All right then. Bye for now.